This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the Antoine Dupont of website builders. Maybe this is wading a little bit into the discourse, but one of these days, Razzie Erasmus should really just make a video that says nothing other than, yeah, fair play guys, that game was bloody amazing. Maybe it's also easier to see these things as a neutral, but Saturday night's clash between the World Champions 2019 and the World Champions-elect 2023 lived up to that highest possible status billing, and somehow ended the day that began with that incredible World Cup final in fitting fashion. France edging an epic where every innovation was smacked in the face and every smack met with a jinky-jivey burst of skillful perfection where the two teams were level on almost everything, including red cards. And yet, despite what some of the Games Gone Soft brigade might have you believe, only one team could emerge victors. So, how did Fabien Galthie complete now his set of tier 1 wins? He's now beaten all of them, including Japan. And what can the Springboks take out of this? And after successive losses, should there be any concern over where they're headed ahead of next year? Part of what made this match so fascinating was the parity of it. This was a game between the two best defences in the world, and hence we saw the fewest line breaks of any international, men's or women's, this autumn or in this year's Six Nations of Rugby Championship. This was a game between the two best packs in the world, but in the most brilliant way, we didn't see parity, but rather alternating dominance. Two teams physically demolishing their opponent every time, like they hadn't just had the same done to them moments earlier. And this was a game between the two best kicking teams in the world, but two teams that execute that in very different fashions. In essence, with their kicking games, to kind of sum them up, South Africa aim to march themselves forward, whilst France want to march the opposition back. Both are looking to do similar tasks, but they go about them in incredibly different ways. The Boks do this by pressuring their opponents individually, hanging high bombs, lots of box kicks, trying to rush up to try and compete in the air, or increasingly now, more often on the following phase. They really want to try and pressure them when the ball hits the ground in the breakdown that follows immediately. That's where they really challenge after the kick often. The idea just being to keep them going forward at all times, to mean they've always got the momentum regardless of who actually has the ball. Where France want to slowly force themselves forward, force themselves into positions in which they can attack by turning the opposition fullback, hoping a bounce can leave them scrambling. Where the Boks hope to force a knock on that phase, France play a longer game. They want to force the opponent back over a few exchange kicks, in the hope eventually either they concede, they just go, we're not getting anything out of this, kick for touch, and hopefully they make a net gain overall from where France first kicked it, or the kicking back and forth over and over disorganises the opposition's chase enough that France can counterattack, they can start something special. We see a great example of their contrast in kicking here, a really great battle. So France have been saying for years that Seko Makalu can play on the wing, and finally, after years of putting him on the bench as an Eddie Jones-style hybrid player, Fabien Galthie had his bluff called and was forced to play Makalu on the wing for most of the game. And here, South Africa, quite early after he's come on, decide to test him under the high ball with a great bomb. This is fantastic, but Dupont does a lovely job of getting in Colby's way, allowing the flanker winger to call the mark. Makalu hands it off to Untermack, who smacks it as long as he can. The Boks go quickly and Willems looks to catch Ramos out of position, but he just about recovers in time. He hits it long, try and turn it over Leroux's head, but Leroux decides they'll have a run. They'll try and play a phase or two and then hang the bomb as they usually do. And sure enough, after a couple of phases, Willems are set up to hang another bomb. But under pressure, he takes it in instead, and de Klerk then has to send the kick up himself, and he puts it right on top of Untermack. This is a great kick with loads of hang time, allowing Arendse to compete really well. Untermack just about wins it, takes it really well and claims the mark again, and once more clears as long as possible. Willems looks up and again tries to catch Ramos out of position and hit a 50-22, but Ramos just about gets a boot to it, and France can finally kick offensively. This is the first chance they've had where they're not just defensively trying to get out of their own 22, they can now actively try and turn South Africa, so he pings it over Leroux's head, forcing him backwards. When Leroux looks up, he sees two choices. Either he concedes this duel, he just tries to put it out on the full, take it on the chin that the Boks pressure kicking have lost them this particular battle, or try and exploit the fact that these tactics that France play usually leave them with a lighter chasing line, as we see here, and run it, which is what he does. He beats Makalu, but can't quite fix Fickou, and instead of trying to stay in play, Diolande lets himself get smashed into touch. France leave as unequivocal winners of the duel in the end. France's style of kicking is almost like a rock, paper, scissors winner over the Springbok approach has been smashing everyone like the one annoying kid in the playground who was actually used a flamethrower into those games. South Africa were still able to build their usual momentum, but unless they won the contest in the air or on the ground immediately after, they would have to then continue building that momentum from halfway back down the pitch because of the way in which France kick. This led to something interesting on Saturday because the Springboks kept hold of the ball significantly longer than usual. Where the team almost always, and certainly were always in the 2019 World Cup, playing 5 or 6 phases, and if they didn't gain significant yardage, if they didn't say get up to the 22 or create a try-scoring chance, they kicked it. Saturday Springboks were far happier to just play until they lost shape. 3 times this weekend, the Springboks played 10 or more phases outside of the opposition 22, something they didn't do once during the entire 2019 World Cup. Something, without going back and checking every game they've played since then as well, I don't know if they've done since. And the majority of kicks that did come from those situations came when the team found themselves sucked in and their shape starting to fall apart when, if they did play, there was nothing really on. They were now kicking on the back foot instead of just when de Klerk, Pollard or Leroux felt things weren't going to get any better, but they were still going forward, so they'd kick in order to retain that momentum. This saw the Springboks make some real yardage and suggests they're really starting to try and experiment at least with evolving their game. A lot like how Razzie is varying his career with the video editing. Ultimately, it's an extension of the same job he was already doing, but it's requiring a new set of skills and the results aren't always hugely effective. Though, look, Razzie, if you're watching this, and the odds are probably 50-50, and you are thinking of heading into the social media bullshit full time, and those odds are also probably 50-50, and good luck with that, just let me offer you one word of advice. Squarespace. The world's favourite and easiest to use website builder, it will give you, Razzie Erasmus, somewhere to safely integrate your videos, to share them, to collate them, and then to set up the mailing list, also simply so you can share your conspiracy theories about whether Wayne Barnes is secretly one of the prawns from District 9 pretending to have a law degree or whatever it is you're saying this week. And look, the best thing is, right, Razzie, I've swung something specifically for you. So if you're not South African Rugby Union Director of Rugby, Razzie Erasmus, look away now, though the code will also work for you. But I've left a link in the description, and if you use the offer code Squidge Rugby, you'll save some money, which I'm sure you need after like that whole year you spent out banned, not able to work. So just thought it'd be useful for you, and maybe for anyone else who wants to use it if they're still watching. Just from me to you, just doing you a solid. This increased phase count would be interesting on its own if it was just a way of countering the French kicking game, but we also saw the Springboks keeping hold for longer periods last Saturday as well, which suggests the Boks are experimenting with really evolving their game, and this is backed up by stats. This week and last, South Africa have completed more rucks than their opponent. This might not sound like anything particularly interesting, but let's just put it into context for a moment, right? The last time, before the game at the Aviva, that the Springboks went through more phases than their opponent over the full 80 minutes was the game against Italy in the 2019 World Cup. And before that, it was the Namibia game a week earlier, but before that, it was the Alistair Coetzee era. The Springboks are clearly experimenting with a new, more attacking brand of rugby this autumn. It's involving far higher phase counts, and it's having mixed results. This passage, very tightly managed by Villiers Leroux, makes about 35 metres over 9 carries against the best defence they'll face. It's the best defence other than their own in the world. However, aside from this one jinking run by Colby, forced by some great French line speed, all yardage essentially comes from Leroux varying the way the forwards smash onto the ball, and soon enough, Faf gets trapped in this ruck and the whole side loses control the moment he's not there, isolated and then penalised. It feels a bit like variation for the sake of variation, instead of them actually having anything interesting they're trying to do. This attack is very similar. De Klerk and Leroux vary how they bring the runners onto the ball, including this great moment of Cheslin Colby just being a little freak. Look at him, look at the little freak go. How does he do this? And it nets them eventually a very lovely 30-ish metres. There's not much in the way of pattern or the kind of interlinking golden pony stuff that Ireland and France are so good at. It's not going to create many line breaks, but they do make 30-ish metres. And 30-ish metres from 10 phases is essentially the same as 30-ish metres from one nice line being cut by the 13, who notably right now is not Lukhanyo Am, and we might see that start to change once they've got, one of the best creative players on the planet back in the team. We're only 1 year after the World Cup, and it'll be interesting to see if this is Razzie and Jacques slowly drip feeding new tactics into the team, if it's a trial run, if it's something they'll build on, or if it's something they'll just abandon once the fan is hit by all kinds of bodily excrement. Mostly blood. It's probably going to be blood. Ibanezabeth's playing, so there'll probably be blood. France, however, find themselves in almost the opposite battle as they tighten the game right up when faced with the Springbok side. The common sight of forwards flooding onto forwards was gone. Knowing how well South Africa can dominate collisions, they left things far more one-on-one, wanting to try and make sure those collisions were essentially smaller. It showed up incredibly well in the eventual winning try. With South Africa fronting up to defend this maul, France go middle ball off the top instead, with Moefana flooding past Willemse and towards the line. It's very nice. Diolande manages to scrag him backwards an inch, but as well as catching the Boks off guard, as well as catching their midfield only at the last second, it has a secondary impact. Having expected the maul, the Bok forwards are obviously all stuck on this side where the maul would have been, so when Moafana is hauled to ground, only Marks, previously at the tail, is able to get onto the open side of the ruck in time, and it takes just one carry for the French forwards to take him out. Suddenly, the players closest to the ruck are Willemse and Kriel, midfielders. Kriel fills in on the fringe, and he is realistically the smallest person the Springbok team will ever put in this position, so France have essentially worked a mismatch, and it leads to the controversial moment. Now, my first instinct, like many who've never had a boulette d'Avernez, was to say this was a double movement. But the more I look at it, the more clear it is that it isn't. And that's kind of the problem for the Springboks. Kriel can stop Falatea's momentum, but crucially, he doesn't actually get him to ground. Because Falatea's knees haven't hit the deck, the tackle is therefore not complete, so he doesn't have to place the ball yet, even though his hands have hit it. Any Bok forward probably would have stopped him enough that his knees would at least grace the grass. But France have cleverly manipulated the opposition defence into such a shape that they have a centre doing a tight 5 forwards task, and it allows Falatea to remain on his feet and propel himself over the try line for the deciding score. It's also a theory that we saw in France's first try as they battered between small holes and wiggled meterage. Sia Khaleesi and Bongi Mbonambi cover a ridiculous amount of ground here. Khaleesi in particular is at near every ruck, yet he's never called upon to make a tackle. And all of this sly manipulation via violence allows France to run their most basic play. They do this all the time. This is basically the cornerstone of their game, especially in the 22. They just set up so that Dupont has 6 options to pass to here. They're spread out really thin. And then he has a tiny gap in between Mbonambi and Khaleesi, which is probably wider than they'd normally ever be because here's the post. And if you're a Springbok and you see something this big next to you, you just think Harjay Snyman's returned from injury early. Khaleesi rushes up to make the smash. Mbonambi doesn't, he hangs back, and this kind of creates a dogleg without anyone to join it up. Mbonambi's kind of flat-footed and it allows Bai to squeeze past them and ground the ball for a try. Now, this is the sort of thing that for a lot of scrum halves you'd put down to luck. Dupont selected a runner almost at random, kind of on hope that there might be a gap there, and they squeezed through and it happened to work. But this game gave us genuinely one of the most absurd, ridiculous moments of Antoine Dupont being a skillful little box-shaped bastard that we will ever see. South Africa here gets stripped in the tackle, and Makalu puts up a kick. It looks ramshackle, but it's actually fantastic. This is a really great kick. It's scooped into an area with no Springboks, meaning Willemse has to come onto it sideways, and Makalu, headed in a straight line, can outjump him, knee real high so he can bump him in the air legally as well and win the challenge. He's always going forward here. However, if we rewind just a moment, Antoine Dupont glances up here, just briefly, just very, very briefly, but it's enough. The ball ricochets backwards and into Dupont's arms, and he instantly drops it onto the boot to put it behind half a yard off nailing a 50-22. Something he spotted was on in that half-second glance up whilst the ball was in the air. This is utterly ridiculous, but mostly I want to bring it up because it just makes me wonder how many times in the game is Antoine Dupont spotting something like this? There's no winger in position to call for this kick. There's no one else around who could have spotted this. This is Dupont noticing it in the shortest fraction of a second and executing a fraction of a second later. It's one of the most terrifying bits of skill I've ever seen on a rugby pitch. And yet, it's a moment of rugby intellect also matched by an opponent in the second half. Because, look, it's that time again. Sure as day follows night, light follows dark, and Andy Good follows Piers Morgan, comes the point in any video on the Springboks where I must talk about how bloody good Willie le Roux is. Because he's bloody amazing. 5 times on Saturday, Wayne Barnes asked the Springboks to stop complaining to him about the decisions being made and just focus on their game. And you know what? If you're one of their coaches, you'd probably be saying something quite similar at this moment here. With the Maul marching forward, France, who, lest we forget, have the second best pack in the world, and an extra man, slowly halt the Springbok Maul pretty much legally. I don't know if anything that ever happens in a Maul is legal, so there we go. But instead of assessing play, knowing the ball will now be headed his way, Damian Willemse throws his arms up in the air to complain, to appeal for a penalty to the referee. Diolande does the same. Even once the ball is in play, Willemse's eyes are tunnelled in on the ruck. He's saying he doesn't want it, but he's not assessed what is and isn't on. He hasn't really had a look yet at the French defence. However, the man furthest away from play, the man furthest away is Willie le Roux, who is obviously scanning the entire time. Whilst Willemse's too busy complaining about what's going on, le Roux has eyed things up, and le Roux has spotted something on the touchline. He takes a glance here. It's a similar situation to France a few minutes later. With the maul having taken place moments earlier, this blindside is being solely marked by 2 forwards, no specialist winger who knows how to shut down the channel. And, thanks to the red card, no 9 to sweep across as well. Leroux spots this on 50 minutes and 34 seconds, and by 50 minutes and 40 seconds, he swung round into position, called the ball from de Klerk and is catching it. By 50 minutes and 43 seconds, Arendse has scored in the corner. That's 9 seconds Leroux has to spot, assess and deliver the pass. The moment he catches the ball, his eyes are solely on Jalanche. He knows one step and Macalou is fixed, so all he has to do is wait and see which of the 2 players outside him Jalanche decides to mark, and then just pass to the other, backing himself to throw an absolute glory ball if he has to. Jalanche watches Diolande, so Leroux throws that ball. He spins it absolutely perfectly past him to put Arendse over in the corner. Once again, the Springboks deciding to play without Willy Leroux is tantamount to them deciding to play without an attack, relying only on insane mauls such as this instead. A try that very much sits in the very exciting and wonderful, is it genius or is it a fluke category? And it's impossible kind of for anyone outside the Springbok camp, possibly anyone outside this maul, to know for certain, but for the sake of this video, because it's kind of my style, I'm just going to assume genius, even though it might be a fluke. And here's why. The Springboks are probably the best mauling team in men's rugby, and if this isn't deliberate, it's an almost comically badly set maul that still results in a try? South Africa do set it up nicely enough, but the ball gets lost on its way to the back. They don't smuggle it back cleanly at all. Khaleesi ends up with it pinned in the middle, and he makes no effort to transfer the thing. However, if we watch the French team, they're entirely focused on the hooker at the tail. They're all watching marks, because why wouldn't you be? That's what happens. They smuggle the ball to the back. They're such a clean technical team. However, Cameron Wokey, crawling through here, realises the ball is with Khaleesi. The ball is in the middle of the maul, and that means if he collapses it, the Springboks have no way of making this ball playable. It'll be a turnover to France. So he goes for it. He takes the risk. He goes to try and collapse the maul, except Marks blocks him off superbly. He just wraps his hulking frame into the way. He gets Wokey, the biggest threat of shutting down this maul, completely out the way because he goes for the nuclear option, tempted by where Khaleesi is with the ball. This leaves the maul starting to splinter, starting to split off into a second additional maul. And that's when Khaleesi pulls the trigger. Wokey thinks he's done enough to disrupt it, so the Springbok backs fly in, looking to add heft and, more importantly, commit eyes. Fiku steps in to mark the fringe, seeing what's happening, and Untamak is looking only at the back of the maul, waiting for the breakaway, knowing at some point whoever's back there is going to break off and charge him, because he's a fly-half, that's what they do. Since Wokey has been taken out of the picture, not one French player has even checked where the ball might be. Free here have their back to the bastard. They're not looking, they're looking in the opposite direction, and it grants Khaleesi a clear route to the line the moment he decides to break off. If it's deliberate, it's a maul move. Nineba and Erasmus have saved back for the toughest test of the year. It's genius. If not, it's just utterly brilliant by Khaleesi. I'm going to praise it regardless. It's a superb opportunistic finish by Khaleesi, just spotting the moment it was opening up. And it was something the Springboks really needed. The Boks have lost 2 games in a row this autumn tour, but to me they feel like, if such a thing exists, quite excusable losses. The Ireland game was a really interesting match for South Africa, because whilst it was one of their poorest performances in recent memory, it was also one of those really rare games that only come along every so often, where an opponent perfectly exposes every issue the team had. Basically everything wrong with the Springboks at the minute was shown up in that game, and yet they still almost won it. And this loss on Saturday is the rare kind of galvanising loss, where only 1 or 2 simple game management errors cost them, where the margins are so small that you can look back and spot exactly what they need to learn from, whilst knowing they're good enough to beat a side that is currently favourites for the next World Cup. Much has been made of whether this pass by Leroux does drift forward, but the Springboks of 2019 would not have run this. They would not have thrown this pass in the first place, especially with how many penalties they've been milking out of France in the second half on the phase immediately following kick receipt. It's become a real strength for theirs again. The Springboks of 2019 would have hung this ball in the air and looked to win the penalty in the opposition half, would have looked to stay playing down there. And the Springboks of 2019 may well have just won this game as a result. The position for the winning try also comes from a daft error by Creel, pinning Arendse into the ruck, meaning he can't roll away. It's a really, really small moment, but it's really dumb. Or in the final play, South Africa go wide before they've set their shape. They've got no edge forward in position, and it's easy pickings for France to turn it over. They've got no one set to try and secure the ball properly. The Springboks are not the best team in the world anymore, but Saturday showed that everything they have to do to change that, to become the best team in the world once again, is within their own power. They can beat the best teams in the world by just making a few tiny amendments. And the longer they continue to push this ridiculous victim complex to say that these things are out of their hand, is the longer they ignore the tiny margins that are actually costing them games. And as for France, well, this team was close to complete 18 months ago, but in 2022, they've kept most of the game the same, but added and mastered the most important skill in rugby: knowing how to win. It's a skill, an instinct, a habit, a reflex, and France right now have it. Ireland might be the number one team in the world, but France right now are the team to beat, and if anyone's going to do that anytime soon, it's probably going to take one hell of a game. Thank you for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you can just about see me as well. That is Ashton Gate behind me. I am on the way out of leaving, watching South Africa lose again to Bristol. I hope you enjoyed the video on them losing to France. France are basically Bristol, they're the same team now. That's what we've established. You can't see me at all, can you? There we are. Rugby, there's also a video on the World Cup final that took place this week as well. Please go and have a look at that. That went up probably yesterday as you're watching this. Otherwise, plenty more stuff happening. Thank you for rugby, and I will see you, but you may not see me. If it's anything like this park in Bristol, then soon.